So, dear Mr. President-to-be, I want an end to the war in Iraq and a promise to build diplomatic relations with Iran, not further escalate the threat of war there. We need to understand the culture and history of the countries we fear most. Maybe then we can open a respectful and effective dialogue. Bullying, threats, and ultimatums establish us only as a young nation with poor communication skills. First order of business, some history. Most people come into the Iran-US story with the hostage crisis in '79, always seeing Iran as the aggressor. The hostages were taken in response to the US granting the deposed Shah asylum. In 1953, the wildly popular and democratically elected Iranian leader Mossadegh wanted to nationalize the country's oil. Britain and the CIA overthrew Mossadegh and installed the Shah, ensuring support for Western oil interests. Followers of Mossadegh were arrested, imprisoned, tortured, and murdered. A reign of terror had begun. Because the US was directly responsible for setting the Shah's reign of terror up and widening the gap between rich and poor, a deep mistrust of the West became entrenched. It was our own imperialist greed that created an anti-Western stance in the Middle East to begin with. In 1979, the Iranian people welcomed a revolution, hoping at last to rid themselves of the Shah's abuses and US-backed imperialism, hoping finally to have a free and just society. Unfortunately, the exiled Ayatollah Khomeini seized power and plunged the country into repressive totalitarianism and Islamic fundamentalism. 2001. In the aftermath of September 11, relations between the United States and Iran seemed at first remarkably to be warming up, as Iran quietly offered support for the US campaign in Afghanistan. But then, 2002, in his first State of the Union address, US President George W. Bush said that Iran, Iraq, and North Korea were all part of an axis of evil. That speech really outraged people in Iran, sparking protests. It was condemned both by the clerical establishment and the reformers. The Bush administration has long threatened Iran with war under the pretext that a nuclear-armed country in the Middle East would pose a threat to Israel, the sole possessor of a nuclear arsenal in the region. Contrary to the findings of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the US accuses Iran of pursuing nuclear weapons. In its latest report, the agency announced that it could not find any components of a nuclear weapon or related nuclear physics studies in the country. This is, of course, reminiscent of the claims that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and this was our basis for invading and bombing Iraq into pre-industrial chaos. Iran, situated between the already US-occupied countries of Iraq and Afghanistan, is an attractive target in that it would complete a needed segment in the oil pipeline. But to invade Iran, a country over twice the size of Iraq with our current economic crisis, would be breathtakingly stupid. Mr. President-to-be, I want an end to relentless propaganda and fear-mongering, an end to military action as a substitute for real foreign policy and diplomacy, an end to our invasion of Iraq. I'm told that democracy must come to the Muslim world from outside, and that the presence of US troops in Iraq is necessary if democracy is ever to take root there. This is paternalistic, arrogant, and convenient. Iraq had a secular government under Saddam Hussein, but now there is more fundamentalism there than ever. The Islamic Republic of Iran is targeted in part because of its sexist religious laws against women. But we never hear talk of changing the far more fundamentalist and sexist Saudi Arabian regime, because the Saudis are our friends. These are politics of oil, not really regime change. Dear Mr. President-to-be, I want a complete rejection of the racist, anti-Islam propaganda, the defense of the rights of Arabs, Iranians, Muslims, and all people to control their own destiny in their own countries. The wars of colonization are passé, and now we need to participate in a global diplomacy, not cowboy rhetoric. I need a president who will not damage further relations by coining vague, inflammatory phrases like axis of evil and war on terror to justify military aggression. I want to belong to a compassionate nation that can be respected internationally for its wisdom and politics of peace.